People always say that the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people you would have trusted with your life. I never truly understood what that meant until the day I opened a single envelope that shattered everything I believed about my family. My name is Emily, and for nearly 8 years, my world revolved around taking care of my father. After my mother passed away from cancer, I promised her that I would never let him struggle alone. While my older brother, Daniel, built his career in another state, I stayed behind. I drove Dad to doctor's appointments, handled his medications, paid the household bills, and made sure the old family home remained exactly as my parents had built it, with love, honesty, and sacrifice. When Daniel married Melissa, I genuinely welcomed her into our family. She was charming, confident, and always seemed eager to help. At first, I thought I was lucky to have a sister-in-law who cared so much about Dad. She brought groceries, organized family dinners, and constantly reminded everyone that family comes first. Looking back, I realized those words were nothing more than a carefully crafted mask. Over time, Melissa slowly inserted herself into every financial conversation. She insisted that Dad needed someone better with paperwork, because his memory wasn't what it used to be. She volunteered to organize his bank statements, insurance files, and property tax records. Since I was juggling work and caregiving, I didn't question her intentions. I thought she was simply trying to lighten my load. Then the little things started happening. Important documents disappeared from Dad's filing cabinet. Bills that I normally handled had already been paid before I even saw them. Whenever I walked into the room, conversations between Melissa and Dad would suddenly stop. If I asked simple questions, Melissa would smile politely and say, "Don't worry, Emily, I've already taken care of it." Something about that sentence always unsettled me. One Sunday afternoon, Melissa approached me with a stack of papers. "They're just routine estate planning documents," she said casually. "It'll make things easier if anything ever happens." I reached for the papers, but before I could read them, she pointed to the signature lines. "Just sign where I marked." I frowned. I don't sign anything without reading it. For a split second, her smile disappeared. It was only a second, but I noticed. Then she laughed awkwardly and gathered the papers. "You're so careful. I like that." But from that day forward, the atmosphere changed. Daniel became distant. Melissa acted offended whenever I questioned anything. Even Dad started saying things like, "Melissa understands these financial matters better than we do." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Families go through stressful periods. Maybe I was simply exhausted from years of caregiving. Then, 3 months later, everything changed. I stopped by Dad's house after work and found an official envelope sitting in the mailbox. It was addressed to me. Inside was a letter from a mortgage lender. At first, I assumed it had been sent by mistake. Then I read the first sentence. "Congratulations on completing your reverse mortgage transaction." My heart stopped. I read it again and again. The letter thanked me for signing documents that would allow a reverse mortgage to be placed on my father's home. Except I had never signed anything. My hands began trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the papers. There was no misunderstanding. Someone had signed my name. Someone in my own family had stolen my identity. And in that terrifying moment, before I had a single piece of proof, one face kept appearing in my mind. Melissa's. I barely slept that night. The mortgage letter sat on my kitchen table, and every time I looked at it, my stomach tightened. I wanted to believe there had been some kind of clerical error. Banks made mistakes, didn't they? Maybe someone had mixed up names or addresses. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The next morning, I drove straight to my father's house. Melissa's car was already parked in the driveway. Of course it was. When I walked inside, Dad smiled warmly, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. Melissa, however, looked startled the moment she saw the envelope in my hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, forcing a smile. I placed the letter on the dining room table. "I think you should tell me." She glanced at the logo on the envelope, and for just a fraction of a second, the color drained from her face. Then almost instantly she recovered. "Oh," she said with a laugh, "that's probably just paperwork from the lender. They send all kinds of confusing letters. I stared at her. "They're thanking me for signing a reverse mortgage. So, I repeated, "I never signed one." Melissa folded her arms. "Emily, you're overreacting." Dad looked back and forth between us, clearly confused. "Melissa told me everything was taken care of," he said quietly. "She said you had already agreed." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. "I never agreed to anything, Dad." Melissa stepped between us. "Maybe you forgot," she said calmly. "You've been under a lot of stress lately." Forgot? She was actually trying to convince everyone that I had forgotten signing legal documents that could put our family home at risk. My brother Daniel walked into the room just then. Melissa rushed to him before I could say another word. "Emily thinks someone forged her signature," she said dramatically. Daniel looked at me as though I had accused someone of murder. "Seriously," he sighed. "Melissa's been helping Dad for months. Why would she do something like that?" "Because I never signed those papers." He rubbed his forehead. "You're making a huge accusation without any proof." The words hurt more than I expected. This was my own brother. Instead of asking questions, he had already chosen a side. I left before the argument got any worse. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking not with fear anymore, but with determination. If my family wouldn't believe me, then facts would have to speak for themselves. The following day, I contacted the mortgage company and requested copies of every document connected to the loan. A week later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside were dozens of pages, loan agreements, notary forms, property disclosures. Then I found it, my signature. At least, it was supposed to be mine. I stared at the looping letters, comparing them to the signature on my driver's license. It wasn't even close. Whoever had forged it had copied the general shape, but missed the tiny details that had been part of my signature since college. I immediately contacted an attorney specializing in financial fraud. He studied the documents for less than 5 minutes before looking up. "This doesn't look authentic." Those 4 words gave me hope. For the first time since receiving the letter, someone believed me. My attorney immediately requested the original loan file, including the identification used during signing, the notary records, and any available security footage. If someone committed fraud, he said, they left a trail. As I walked out of his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "I don't know why you're trying to destroy this family, but you need to stop before things get out of hand." I looked at the message for several seconds. Then I smiled for the first time in days, because innocent people don't send texts like that. They don't warn you to stop asking questions. They don't panic when someone starts looking for the truth. And something told me that Melissa had no idea just how much evidence she had already left behind. Over the next few weeks, I made a decision that surprised even my attorney. I stopped arguing. I didn't call Melissa. I didn't try to convince my brother. I didn't defend myself every time another relative hinted that I was tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. Instead, I stayed quiet, because the truth didn't need my anger to survive. It only needed time. The mortgage company's fraud department contacted me first. An investigator asked me to come in with copies of my identification and several documents containing my real signature. For nearly 2 hours, we compared signatures line by line. Every page told the same story. The signature on the reverse mortgage wasn't mine. The investigator remained professional, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "This appears serious," he said. "We'll be expanding our investigation immediately." A few days later, my attorney received another update. The notary who had supposedly witnessed my signature couldn't remember meeting me. That alone wasn't enough to prove fraud, but when investigators reviewed the notary's records, they found something strange. The driver's license number listed beside my name didn't belong to me. It belonged to someone else entirely. The case was no longer about a family disagreement. It had become a criminal investigation. Then came another surprise. The mortgage company requested security footage from the office where the loan documents had been signed. Although the video quality wasn't perfect, one thing was painfully clear. The woman sitting at the signing table wasn't me. She had similar hair and wore large sunglasses indoors, but her face was visible several times. Anyone who actually knew me could tell the difference. When my attorney showed me a still image from the footage, my heart pounded. "That's not me," I whispered. "No," he replied calmly, "it isn't." The lender immediately reported its findings to federal authorities, since forged mortgage documents and identity fraud often involve violations of federal law. Not long afterward, 2 FBI agents asked if I would meet with them. I answered every question honestly. I gave them emails, text messages, financial records, copies of my calendar, and even photographs proving where I had been on the day the documents were signed. I had nothing to hide. Melissa, however, seemed to have everything to hide. Word eventually reached the family that investigators were asking questions. Melissa suddenly became much more talkative. She told relatives that I was trying to steal Dad's house. She claimed I had agreed to the mortgage months earlier, but was now pretending otherwise because I wanted more money. Every lie grew bigger than the last. Daniel believed every word. He called me one evening, furious. "You've embarrassed Melissa enough," he snapped. "Drop this before you destroy all of us." I stayed calm. "I'm not the one being investigated." He hung up without another word. That was the last conversation we had for several months. Meanwhile, the evidence kept growing. Investigators discovered emails sent from an account that looked almost identical to mine, but one letter in the address had been changed. Someone had created a fake email to communicate with the lender. Phone records showed repeated calls between Melissa and the loan officer during the weeks leading up to the closing. Financial records revealed something even more troubling. Within days of the mortgage being approved, thousands of dollars had been transferred into accounts connected to Melissa. Every document, every phone call, and every bank record pointed in the same direction. I didn't have to accuse her anymore. The evidence was doing that for me. Then, early one Friday morning, my attorney called. "They're ready," he said quietly. "Ready for what?" He paused before answering. "The FBI is going to speak with Melissa." I looked out my living room window as the sun rose over the neighborhood where my family had once felt safe. For months, Melissa had been certain she could lie her way out of everything. She had underestimated one thing. Paper trails never forget, and neither did the law. The call from my attorney replayed in my mind all weekend. "The FBI is going to speak with Melissa." For the first time in months, I wasn't filled with anger or fear. I simply felt calm. There was nothing left for me to prove. Monday morning arrived with an uneasy silence. Around noon, my phone started buzzing nonstop. My cousin called first, then my aunt, then 2 neighbors. Everyone was asking the same question. "Did you hear what happened at Daniel's house?" I already knew. Federal agents had arrived early that morning. They didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic speeches. They came with questions, documents, and evidence. The same evidence Melissa had insisted didn't exist. According to one relative who witnessed part of the visit, Melissa tried to smile as she greeted the agents. She even joked that there must have been some mistake. But as they laid out copies of the forged mortgage documents, the fake email records, the altered identification information, and the bank transfers, her confidence slowly disappeared. She couldn't explain why my signature didn't match. She couldn't explain why someone pretending to be me had appeared on security footage. And she certainly couldn't explain why thousands of dollars from the reverse mortgage had ended up in accounts she controlled. Every answer created another question. Every lie contradicted the last one. Later that afternoon, Daniel finally called me. His voice sounded completely different, quiet, defeated. I didn't know," he whispered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "I trusted her," he finally said. "So did I." I answered. That was the tragedy of it all. Melissa hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed everyone who believed she cared about our family. Over the following weeks, investigators continued building their case. More financial records surfaced, revealing that the reverse mortgage money had been used for luxury vacations, designer handbags, expensive jewelry, and credit card payments that had nothing to do with my father's care. Dad was devastated. When the truth finally became impossible to deny, He sat quietly in his living room, staring at old family photographs. "I thought she was helping us," he said softly. I sat beside him and held his hand. "I know, Dad." He wiped away a tear. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Those words meant more to me than he could ever understand. The legal process took months, but eventually the reverse mortgage was canceled through the courts. The lender worked with investigators to correct the fraudulent transaction, ensuring that my father's home remained protected. Melissa was charged with multiple crimes related to forgery, identity theft, mortgage fraud, and making false statements during the investigation. The consequences she had laughed off for months had finally become real. As for Daniel, rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't return overnight. But he apologized more than once, not just for believing Melissa, but for doubting the sister who had spent years caring for their father. I accepted his apology, though I knew some scars never completely fade. Months later, I stood in front of my mother's grave with a small bouquet of white lilies. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "Dad is safe. The house is still ours." A gentle breeze rustled the trees above me, and for the first time since that terrifying letter arrived in my mailbox, I felt a sense of peace. People often ask if I wanted revenge. The truth is, I never needed to seek it. I didn't expose Melissa online. I didn't scream at family gatherings. I didn't try to ruin her life. I simply told the truth, cooperated with the investigators, and stepped aside. In the end, the strongest revenge wasn't mine at all. It was watching the truth walk into the room, wearing an FBI badge, and realizing that no forged signature could ever outrun justice.